The federal government is on track for a major setback as it pushes ahead with a plan to reform hate speech and gun laws. The Greens have now joined the coalition in rejecting the proposal, saying they can't support the bill in its current form. Parliament is set to debate the legislation during a special two-day sitting next week. Political reporter Romy Stevens has more from Parliament House.
This is a big setback for the government's plans to have this wide-ranging bill, which tackles reforms to hate speech and gun laws, passed within 2 days next week. The government needs to do a deal with either the Coalition or the Greens to ensure that this legislation gets passed through the Parliament. But doing a deal with the Coalition is looking very unlikely, given that Opposition Leader Susan Lee has signalled that the Coalition won't support the bill. She has labelled the legislation as unsalvageable and argues that it's too far-reaching and won't stamp out anti-Semitism. So a deal was looking more likely to take place with the Greens, given that a couple of days ago the Greens said that they wouldn't, that they'll vote against or they won't support the legislation as it stands without significant amendments. However, today the Greens have come out and said that they won't support any of the aspects of the legislation that target hate speech. They say that this is due to a growing number of legal experts, faith groups and community members raising concerns about those aspects within the legislation, and particularly that the federal government is looking to rush this legislation through Parliament quite quickly. The Greens have previously raised concerns with different aspects of the proposed reforms, particularly that the hate speech protections don't cover all minority groups, and Senator David Shoebridge has also criticised an element of the bill which will grant greater powers to the Home Affairs Minister to cancel or refuse visas for those who spread hate. David Shoebridge has previously labelled that as a scapegoating of migrants. So the Greens have raised a number of concerns with the legislation over the past few days, but today making that announcement that it won't support those hate speech aspects of the bill. Let's take a listen to what Senator David Shoebridge had to say earlier.
When the government brings legislation into the Parliament that protects only one religion, that is designed to put critics in jail, and that has not been consulted with the broader community, there's only one word to describe that, and that is divisive. The Greens will not be supporting that divisive legislation. Legislation that gives the Home Affairs Minister broad powers to deport people with almost no checks and balances, or permits the Home Affairs Minister to literally criminalise organisations without even having to give natural justice. How did the Labor Party think that the Parliament would support that in some kind of sense of consensus?
The Greens have, however, said that they will support the government's proposed reforms to gun laws that they've put forward within this omnibus bill. But today's development does make it very unclear as to whether or not the government can pass this bill without splitting it up or making significant amendments. The Prime Minister has repeatedly called for unity when it comes to these proposed reforms, and has said that the government's open to making amendments. The Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, was also asked about this earlier. Let's take a listen.
The Parliament will determine what passes, including the Senate, where we don't have the numbers. That's a statement of fact, but that doesn't mean that we don't put it. That doesn't mean that we don't try. The Australian people want these laws to pass. We'll be putting the laws to the Parliament. Those who vote against it will have to justify their position to the Australian people, especially those who called for it in December, especially the hate law hypocrites who called for this legislation in December and are voting against it in January.
So, Fiona, the government clearly has some significant hurdles to overcome if it does want to pass this legislation next week.